Hey, it's Jason Gorber for ThatShelf.com here to talk about JOJO Rabbit, Taika Waititi's latest film. It has its world debut here at the Toronto International Film Festival. And a day later, I've had a day to sort of process this film, and I really do think it's extraordinary. Look, I went in with pretty high expectations, something I usually don't do. I usually try to go in sort of thinking everything's miserable and then be pleasantly surprised. But this one, I just decided to let the spirit of it take me with it. And it's not that I went in uncritically per se, it's just that I wanted to take it on in the sort of spirit in which it's intended, which is this light on a superficial basis, and yet underneath there's all kinds of ideas and all kinds of things taking place. I think that tonally it is extraordinary, the fact that he was able to pull it off. And I know a lot of people are sort of mixed on it. Some people really think it's an extraordinary film, some people think that it's really silly and minimizes some of the horrors of the era. And really, I think what it does is what true great comedy does, which is to sort of prick at lead balloons, as it were, is to make something that is incredibly dour and serious, but do so in a way which is so farcical that it actually is provocative, that it makes one think. And the balance here, a story of a boy, a young Nazi, whose best friend is his invisible best friend is Adolf Hitler, played by Taika himself, is just a really interesting way into what otherwise would have been a pretty straight-ahead Maudlin and Frankian kind of story of somebody hiding out from against a bunch of Nazis. But what he does in this storyline is twist it all in a way that actually really brings us in and makes us reevaluate not only the era, but the way that hate is transmitted, the way that children are taught certain things, the way that, like, essentially monster tales are repurposed into a process whereby these children's tales become the fuel for adult ideology. It's a really fascinating way of dealing with it. And one way that he does right from the beginning is there's the German version of She Loves You by the Beatles. Pretty phenomenal use of it, the fact that he got the rights to use it. Cross-cut against Riefenstahl footage. So basically, I want to hold your hand in German with a whole bunch of people giving Nazi salutes. The dynamic between the screaming hordes of German youth that are completely gung-ho for Hitler and the same kind of enthusiasm that characterized the 60s with the pop music revolution. That dynamic alone is a pretty fascinating way of getting into this storyline. The way that it vacillates between moments of real pathos, real absolutely spot-on tragedy, and immediately able to lift it up with a little bit of humor that does not take away from the sadness is truly extraordinary. The closest one, a lot of people are comparing it to things like Moonrise Kingdom, and I absolutely see sort of connections with that. It actually reminded me a lot in the many good ways of something like Blazing Saddles, a film that could take on something super serious in a way that is very preposterous, but the undercurrent has a seriousness. Now, Mel Brooks is a very product filmmaker. Taika's doing something even more challenging, which is to take the silliness more seriously, take the cinema more seriously, and do so in a quite, I think, phenomenal way. Now, one thing that some audiences might not notice is what the closing song is, and it's Heroes by David Bowie. And again, there's a relatively subtle connection there. Heroes, of course, was recorded in Berlin, was recorded in a post-war Germany of David Bowie singing about this uplift. And so you have this dynamic about which Germany do we actually, which Germany are we going to? The Germany of art, of culture, of musicians. There's this fantastic sequence when the naming off famous Germans versus famous Jews. Do we look towards that country, a beacon of literature, or do we look at it as the culture that burns books, the culture that imprisons people, a culture where people have to hide in closets in order simply to survive? And this is not about Germany, it's about hate entirely. It could be in any country, but it happens to be in this one. It could be any dictator, but there's none more ridiculous and more over the top and more deadly than Hitler. And this dynamic, this push-pull, is really what makes JOJO Rabbit an extraordinary film by an extraordinary filmmaker. I really hope you have a chance to see it and make your own mind up about it. I kind of like, actually, that it's got this mixed result, because I think it'll get people thinking about it. I think that there are those, I think it's easy to perhaps overpraise that. I mean, in some ways, I may be guilty of that simply because I love what this is doing so much. This is so in my wheelhouse. But I really think that those who are sort of being super critical of it, particularly as they see it being in some way superficial, are just missing so much of the subtext that's actually taking place here. And even not accepting the text, not accepting how deftly he does this balance between comedy and tragedy, and does so from, even the camera shots, even the angles are done from a child's perspective. So it really is a fairy tale, it's a fable. It's that kind of story, but it deals with true truths the way that any great sort of storybook really does. Anyway, for thatshelf.com, I'm Jason Gorber. Please follow us on social. Please follow us on, subscribe to this channel. We're doing lots of stuff here from TIFF, and it's really great to hear from you in the comments. All the best, and happy festival.